My childhood sweetheart, Trevor Fisher, is very special to the new girl. Everyone said that the cold and aloof school hunk was finally moved. That day, my junior schoolmate and I were trapped in a fire at the same time. He picked up the schoolgirl and left without hesitation. My 7-year crush is finally over. But later, when another boy confessed to me, he grabbed my wrist tightly and spoke in a suppressed voice. You changed your mind so quickly? Don't you like me? 1. I waited in the sun downstairs of the teaching building for more than half an hour before Trevor came out. Trevor! I ran up to him. He raised his hand and touched my flushed cheek with the back of his hand, frowning. How long have you been waiting here? More than half an hour. Trevor grabbed my wrist and dragged me to the gazebo in front. Aren't you afraid it will get cooked in the sun? He snorted lazily and held my face with both hands to cool me down. I rubbed his cold hand comfortably before speaking. We don't have classes on Saturday, so how about we go to the aquarium? What Trevor didn't know was that I was planning on confessing my feelings to him that day. His hand paused. I already have an appointment with someone else on Saturday, you can find someone else. A bad feeling suddenly rose in my heart, and I asked tentatively, who did you make an appointment with? Hannah Bailey. This is a name I've been hearing a lot from Trevor lately. She is his direct junior schoolmate. Recently, there have been a lot of rumors about her and Trevor in school. Trevor, who has always been unkind and indifferent to everyone, has recently been surprisingly caring towards a junior high school girl. Everyone was saying that the girl who had been so devoted to him for 3 years was finally moved. Looking at Trevor's back as he left, I suddenly had a premonition. This confession that I carefully prepared will ultimately end in failure. 2. On Saturday, I went to the aquarium alone. But I didn't expect to meet Trevor and Hannah here. Why are you here? Trevor looked up at me. I looked at the two of them wearing dolphin bracelets that looked like couples, and curled the corners of my mouth. I told you a few days ago that I was going to the aquarium. Maybe it was because the tone of my words was not very nice. Trevor frowned and looked at me with a reproachful look. It seemed to be asking, what are you doing? Hannah looked at me and blinked. Senior, let's go shopping together. Without waiting for me to refuse, she took my arm skillfully. It was only a moment later that I regretted not being able to say no sooner. Hannah and Trevor were stopped when they passed a stall. The stall owner looked at the two of them and spoke with a smile. Couples who participate in the event can get a limited edition dolphin doll for free. The atmosphere became awkward for a moment. The stall owner probably noticed that both of them were wearing dolphin bracelets, but I wasn't. I mistakenly thought they were a couple. Hannah tugged on Trevor's sleeve. I'm sorry, senpai, he misunderstood. Trevor asked her, do you like that doll? Hannah said nothing but just stared at the doll with sparkling eyes. Then I watched Trevor agree to join the event as requested by the stall owner. In fact, the activity is also very simple. It was just that the boy carried the girl in his arms like a princess and walked around the venue. I stood by and watched Trevor pick up Hannah effortlessly. The people watching the fun whispered and booed. Some people even took out their cell phones to secretly take photos. Trevor noticed and pressed Hannah into his arms to prevent her face from being photographed. Then he frowned and looked at the person taking the photo with displeasure. The maintenance implication is obvious. My nose feels a little sore. It's an inopportune moment to recall that in the 10 years that I've known Trevor, he's never once hugged or carried me. When I was in high school, I sprained my ankle and he just stayed with me while I waited for my dad to pick me up. He said casually, don't even think about asking me to carry you back. I won't carry any other girls except my girlfriend. I wonder if he has forgotten what he said at that time, or if he has already regarded Hannah as his girlfriend. 3. I wanted to just leave, but then I was thinking about the long-awaited dolphin show. I had to suppress the slight choking in my heart and try my best to ignore the two people around me. Trevor knows that I like dolphins too, but he didn't even ask me if I wanted the doll. During the performance, the dolphin leaped up and then plunged into the pool, splashing a large amount of water. The three of us were the closest, and it was too late for us to hide. Trevor stood between Hannah and me, and subconsciously stood in front of Hannah to block most of the splashes for her. My whole body was soaked. Are you okay? Did you get splashed? Trevor ignored the water on his body and looked at Hannah eagerly. The water in the pool is already cold. You'll catch a cold if you get wet. Hannah hurriedly took out a tissue and wiped Trevor's forehead. I'm fine, Senior, please wipe it off. Until a staff member came running over and handed me a towel. Little girl, I'm sorry, the guardrail was broken recently and it didn't block the water. Thanks. I took it. Trevor and the other man turned around and looked at me, as if they had just discovered that I was also soaked all over. Senior, do you want some tissues? Hannah asked tentatively. I ignored her and just wiped the water off my body. Zoe Simmons, can't you hear me? Trevor questioned me in a deep voice. I took a deep breath and suppressed the soreness in my eyes. Looked Trevor straight in the eye. I've already got the towel. Can't you see if you still need tissues? Trevor's eyes turned cold. What on earth are you doing? Hannah asked you a question. Is there anything wrong with that? Can you please control your princess temper? His tone was cold and sarcastic. No one should spoil you except your parents. Apologize. Trevor looked at me indifferently, in a commanding tone. Hannah said at the right time, forget it. She pretended to be relaxed and said to Trevor, I have been living like this since I was a child. Because of my family background, teachers and classmates looked down on me, and it was common for me to be excluded and bullied. Don't bother with senpai. I'm used to it anyway. Trevor looked unhappy and was about to say something. Hannah interrupted immediately. Senior, your clothes are wet. I'll take you to dry them. After saying that, without even looking at me, Trevor was pulled away by Hannah. I stood there, the water from my hair dripping onto my face, mixed with my tears and sliding down. I wiped my face to cover up and walked out of the aquarium in silence. Probably because the weather suddenly changed that day and there was a constant cold wind. When I got home, I had a high fever. I didn't go back to school until Monday. During this time, Trevor called me once, but I didn't answer. I didn't reply to his WeChat message, so he just came straight to my house. He walked into my room with ease. Is the fever gone? As he said this, he pretended to touch my forehead. I didn't have any unrealistic expectations and thought he was there to care about my condition. But I also didn't expect that he came here to call for punishment. I tilted my head to the side, avoiding it. Nothing happened. What do you want from me? His hand paused in midair. Zoe, what do you mean? Trevor was leaning against the closet, looking down at me. Don't tell me, you're still angry about what happened that day? What right do you have to be angry? Are we the ones who did something wrong? I suddenly felt very tired. So what do you want? I was indeed wrong. My mistake was that I shouldn't have agreed to go to the aquarium with them. Trevor's eyes remained calm after hearing this. He didn't let me go. After you recover, go and apologize to Hannah yourself. Why? I clenched my hands under the quilt. Trevor chuckled. Your parents recently asked my family for a favor, asking my father to buy your company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. You don't want me to talk to your parents directly about such a small matter, right? I sat up and looked at him without blinking. Tears flowed uncontrollably down my eyes. Trevor, we've known each other for 10 years. Are you going to force me on this now? He frowned and looked away. Because of your unreasonable anger that day, Hannah was afraid that you would be angry, so she came to find you without drying her body. After returning home, she caught a cold and had to take medicine for 3 days. Shouldn't you be held responsible for this? Hearing this, I couldn't shed another tear. I had a fever for 3 days. But in Trevor's eyes, it was nothing compared to his schoolmate's cold. Even want to put the blame on me? I have no choice. If I didn't agree to apologize, he would just ask my parents to force me to go. It would make no difference. I blinked and nodded. I see. Trevor looked at me for 2 seconds and his tone suddenly softened. Zoe, I don't mean anything by that. I just hope you can learn to take responsibility for your actions. I didn't say anything else and hid myself in the quilt. Block out any sounds you don't want to hear. 5. After I recovered from my illness and returned to school, I happened to meet Trevor and Hannah. I walked straight up to Hannah and looked at her seriously. I'm sorry, Hannah. I shouldn't have gotten mad at you that day. I lost control of my temper. Hannah smiled gently. It's okay, Senior, I don't care about these, I'm used to it anyway. This is the second time she emphasized that she is used to being wronged. Whether it was intentional or unintentional, I am too lazy to care. He gave her a perfunctory smile and was about to leave. Trevor grabbed my wrist as I passed. Are you well? I immediately broke free and took a step back. Okay. A very calm voice. I guess I was just being too sentimental before and thought Trevor treated me differently. I shouldn't have expected that. Trevor stared at me, his eyes dark and unclear. What's wrong with you? I shook my head, my tone somewhat uncontrollably awkward and polite. It's okay. I still have to go to the library. I won't bother you anymore. I can't afford to offend Trevor now, so I'll just stay away from him. Trevor looked impatient. What on earth are you being sarcastic about? I don't quite understand why Trevor is still unhappy even though I generously gave them both their own space. Hannah behind him looked at me and seemed gloomy for a moment. Before I could get a closer look, Trevor spoke again. You haven't changed at all. You'll never learn to respect others. He looked at me disappointedly, then turned and left with Hannah. For a while afterwards, I didn't contact Trevor once. He too was probably busy with Hannah. I still felt sad during the first few days. Sometimes I think about the time when he and I were very close and Trevor was really good to me back then. I thought this Cold War would go on forever and I would never have any contact again. But Hannah was not satisfied with this. 6. Friday night. It was already 10:30 when I came out of the library. There was almost no one on this road. By some unfortunate coincidence, I stumbled upon a bullying scene that day. 2 girls restrained Hannah while another slapped her wildly. He was talking in a confident tone. Why are you so mean? What's wrong with me bringing my boyfriend back to the dormitory? Do you need to tell the counselor specifically? Is he getting in your way? Hannah's face seemed to be swollen from being slapped. This was the only way for me to get back to the dormitory, so I hid not far away. There was no ripple in my heart. I just hope they can finish as soon as possible and let me go back. Fortunately, after a few minutes, they calmed down when they saw that Hannah did not resist. Leaving her there, the 3 men went away. Have you seen enough? Hannah was sitting on the ground and suddenly spoke. I walked out calmly. I'm not interested in your business, I'm just passing by. She chuckled. Do you really think she beat me because I complained to the guide? Hannah gently tucked her hair behind her ears. She was angry because her boyfriend showed affection to me. I'm not sad, she said. At least it proves that as long as I stand there will be a bunch of boys rushing to show their affection to me. Including Trevor, she smiled. A chill ran down my spine. It has nothing to do with me. Hannah is indeed not as innocent as she appears. I didn't want to hear her weird theories. Just as I was about to turn around and leave, she suddenly stood up and ran over to grab me like crazy. You like Trevor, right? What should I do? But he likes me. She looked at me and smiled with her lips curved. My pain point was hit and I pushed her away. Are you sick? Hannah suddenly seemed unable to stand and fell to the ground. I was stunned for a moment. I didn't use any force. Zoe. I froze. The owner of the voice behind me is very familiar to me. Trevor jumped past me, ran over to Hannah and helped her up. He slowly pushed aside Hannah's hair and saw the injuries on her face. The look he gave me again was particularly gloomy. Too bloody. I didn't hit you, don't look at me like that. Trevor ignored me and asked Hannah in a low voice. Did she hit you? Hannah smiled sadly, tears in her eyes. Forget it, senior. She acquiesced in disguise. I laughed angrily. Believe it or not. Just as he was about to leave, Trevor blocked his way. I won't apologize, Trevor. Why should I apologize for something I didn't do? His voice was indifferent and without a trace of emotion. I was stunned, feeling something was not right. Hannah, come here. He called Hannah over. Fight back, Trevor said. I stared at Trevor. I confirmed over and over again. Is this the childhood sweetheart I grew up with? Trevor looked down at me. Your parents spoiled you too much. They made you like this and even taught you to bully others. I clenched my hanging hands tightly and my face turned pale. Do you think I could beat her like this by myself? But he didn't believe it at all and thought I was quibbling. There was no warmth in his voice. I don't want to fight you, he said to me. I looked at Hannah blankly and asked in a hoarse voice, what do you want to do? Without warning, Hannah broke down and cried. She walked up to me and slapped me. You are a rich lady. I am so poor that I have to scrape together money for tuition. If you hit me, would I dare to fight back? Can I afford your medical expenses? If you hold a grudge against me for that day at the aquarium, just tell me straight out. You and Trevor are childhood sweethearts, I won't bother you. Do you really have to do anything? She cried to me. Just because I am a poor student and my family is not as well off as yours, you can treat me like this? I couldn't control myself and was shaking with anger. I raised my hand to slap him back, but Trevor grabbed my wrist. Zoe. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. It's time for you to learn a lesson. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw me to the ground. I looked at the two people's backs as they left and spoke softly. Trevor. In these 10 years, I have just gotten to know a dog. But today's matter will not end here. The moonlight was dim, and he just paused for a moment without looking back once. 7. That road is too remote and there are no cameras installed. Besides, those 3 girls would never admit that they had hit anyone. I have no way of defending myself. After a long time, I got up from the ground and walked towards the dormitory in silence. When I got downstairs, Trevor was standing under the streetlight, looking unhappy. My eyes didn't stay on him for a second and I kept walking. Trevor walked right in front of me, blocking my path. Roll. I spoke weakly. He placed the plaster in his hand forcefully on mine. Then he raised his hand and wanted to touch the side of my face where the red mark was. I turned my head away. He frowned and pursed his lips. You beat Hannah like that, and I just let her slap you back. Zoe, stop messing with me. As soon as he finished speaking, Trevor's cell phone rang. When the phone was picked up, I could clearly hear the pretentious voice on the other end. Trevor, my wound hurts so much. Can you come and stay with me? Trevor hung up the phone and walked away immediately. After he had taken a few steps, he seemed to remember me and looked back at me. His eyes were gentle and soothing. Remember to go back and apply the medicine. Didn't you say last time that you wanted to go to the new wonton shop outside the school? I'll take you there tomorrow. He seemed very anxious and ran away without waiting for my reply. I lowered my eyes and glanced at the ointment in my hand. He loosened his grip slightly and the ointment fell to the ground. I didn't even look at him and walked away. I once wanted to take Trevor to try that wonton shop, but he just rejected me impatiently. He said, "Can't you go by yourself? My classes are almost full every day." Later, when I wanted to go by myself, I saw him and Hannah sitting down at the table through the window outside the store. He said he was busy but was willing to make time for Hannah. I never went to that wonton shop again. By now I don't want to go anymore. And Trevor probably just said it casually. The next day he didn't come to see me. I breathed a sigh of relief. Trevor always uses my parents' affairs to threaten me. Like a huge mountain, making it hard to breathe. 8. But I could still skip Trevor and go with Hannah. That day, Hannah and I happened to be taking classes on the same floor. After class, I dragged her to a deserted place and slapped her twice. I'm going to hit you, what do you want to do? Call the police? I took out my cell phone, entered the 3 digits 110 and handed it to her. Aren't you afraid that I will tell Trevor again? She covered her face and stared at me. Tell him, I said. Even if you call him over, he won't do anything. He will just let you hit me. There are surveillance cameras here. If I hit you, I can pay you back. Can you? Like you said, you scraped together all the money for your tuition. What's more, she didn't dare to bother Trevor too many times, afraid that Trevor would lose patience with her. She had no one to rely on in this school. Hannah stared at me intently, her eyes unwilling. I sneered and turned away. I thought this matter was over. But for a moment he ignored her vengeful character. When I was trapped in the fire and dying, I really regretted for a second that I slapped her twice. 8. That day I was assisting my senior in doing an experiment in the chemistry laboratory. My senior went to another building to find experimental materials, leaving me to clean up the scene. The building had not been repaired for a long time, and there were problems with the windows and doors. I was covering the alcohol lamp when Hannah came in and closed the door. You were the one who spread the rumor, weren't you? I was in no mood to deal with her inexplicable questions. He just looked towards the door irritably. The door lock is broken. Once you close it, you can't open it from the inside. She seemed not to be listening at all and just stared at me. Now everyone is scolding me, are you happy? I heard the recent rumors about Hannah. that she was hooking up with someone else's boyfriend. To be honest, there was no way she didn't know that the 3 girls that night were the biggest suspects. But she didn't dare to provoke those marginalized people in society. He had no choice but to come to me to vent his anger. I laughed angrily. Persecution complex, huh? Hannah, please don't come here to be a slut every time. It's Trevor's business if he spoils you. If you really push me too far, I can do anything. I won't let you go. Hannah bit her lip so hard it seemed like it would break. I paused, and it occurred to me that she had lost her mind. While I was still stunned, she walked up to me without any warning and pushed me hard. I stumbled backwards unexpectedly and knocked over the alcohol lamp with my hand. 3 alcohol lamps that were still on collided and exploded, igniting sparks. It splashed onto the curtain next to it. The windows were shaky and had large gaps. With the help of the dry and cold wind, the flames spread instantly. It was too late for me to stop it. In an instant, the flames spread across the entire curtain and immediately spread to the surroundings. Ah! The door is next to the window. Hannah and I were forced to retreat to the corners on both sides, and I was in the front corner. She ran to the back corner and hid. We were separated by 2 tables. There was no telling what kind of flammable material was stored under the table. Once it caught fire, the tiny flame instantly spread to the entire table, forming a half-high wall of fire. Trembling, I reached for my phone and called 911, holding back my fear. Hannah was also scared, and she called Trevor immediately. The black smoke coming out of the windows attracted many people to stop and look. They either call the fire department or find a counselor. No one dared to come up, except Trevor. But the fire could no longer be controlled. "Senior, I'm here," Hannah shouted immediately. I locked eyes with Trevor across the firelight. "Trevor, help me." Ignoring all the previous grudges, I instinctively asked for help. I am also very scared and I don't want to die. Hannah was still far away from the flames, she still had plenty of time. But the burning light bulb above my head was already shaky. "Trevor, can you please do this just for the sake of the 10 years we've known each other? Just this once, save me first." The door lock was deformed by the high temperature and could not be opened at all, unless you break down the door. "Senior, I'm so scared," Hannah cried. Trevor came back to his senses and looked at me deeply. "Zoe, wait for me." Having said that, he ran towards the back door. He chose to save Hannah first. When the burning light bulb fell down on my head, I couldn't dodge it at all. As he was dying, I saw Trevor pick up Hannah and leave. This is the 3rd time he has left me. 9. I woke up in pain. He lay on his stomach on the bed to avoid putting pressure on the wound on his back. Trevor leaned against my bed with his eyes closed. As soon as I moved, he woke up immediately. "Zoe." Trevor carefully helped me to my feet. He squatted in front of me, his face showing fatigue, but he still forced a flattering smile. "Do you want some water or are you in pain? I'll call a doctor for you. Where are my parents?" My voice is particularly hoarse after not speaking for a long time. The acquisition is at a critical moment and they can't get away. I told them that I'm in the hospital taking care of you. I looked at Trevor quietly for a long time. "Trevor, I had a dream. I dreamed about the earthquake in 4th grade. I was squeezed by the crowd and couldn't escape. It was you who desperately ran against the bustling crowd and pulled me up, and then took me out of the teaching building. There were several times that day when I was about to be pushed out of the crowd, but you held my hand tightly and never let go. After that, I regarded you as one of the most important people." Trevor's face paled visibly. His lips trembled and he wanted to hold my hand. "I'm sorry, Zoe, I'm sorry, it's all my fault." I didn't let him touch me, but continued speaking in a gentle tone. "After all, you really have no obligation to save me first. It's always right to save the one you love first. But Trevor, there's no way I wouldn't mind." He seemed unable to refute and just looked at me helplessly. I spoke again to settle one last matter with him. "I didn't hit Hannah that night, believe it or not. There was no evidence, but you believed her one-sided story, and I got slapped in the face for nothing. I later returned it to her, and I'm returning it to you today." After saying that, I slowly raised my hand, and the movement caused my back to hurt a little. I pursed my slightly cracked lips, without any emotion in my heart. "A slap in the face." He took it and then looked at me with an expression that seemed extremely hypocritical to me. The regret and worry so evident in his eyes made me feel sick to my stomach. "Be careful not to strain your back." I gave a sarcastic laugh and said, "Go away. Trevor, don't show up in front of me again. It's no use threatening me with my parents this time." Before Trevor could say anything, he was interrupted by a voice at the door. "Senior, if you are healed, can I ask you to stay away from my boyfriend? He has no obligation to take care of you." Hannah stood at the door and gave me an embarrassed smile. Turns out that the two of them were already together. Trevor looked at me and opened his mouth. He seemed to want to explain something, but fell silent after a moment. "Hannah," I smiled and said, "take your boyfriend away. I feel sick if I look at you guys for one more second." And I looked in the dim light at the girl who looked like a white lotus but was rotten inside. Look into her eyes. People should always be responsible for what they have done, don't you think? The fact that she could stand in front of me and challenge me now proved that the school had not had enough time or evidence to investigate the laboratory fire. Although the camera inside the laboratory was destroyed, there was a camera in the corridor directly facing the door. It can record part of the scene at that time. At least Hannah started it first, causing me to knock over the alcohol lamp so she can't get away with it. It is conceivable that she definitely did something. I looked down at Hannah's shadow on the floor. She visibly shook. "Hannah, are you scared too?" 10. Trevor still came over for the first few days, but I didn't let him into the ward. I forgot when it started, but he stopped showing up. New flesh began to grow on the scars on his back. Every night my back starts to ache and itch. I was tortured so much that I could hardly fall asleep until the early morning. Hannah may have forgotten, or she may not have taken my warning seriously. That night I was trying not to scratch the new flesh on my back, and my forehead was sweating slightly. The phone beside the pillow suddenly lit up. I unlocked my phone and opened the text message. It was a photo sent from an unknown number. Trevor held Hannah in his arms and bent down to kiss her. To be honest, emotions like jealousy and envy have long since dissipated. But Hannah's blatant provocation really pissed me off. Someone has to pay the price. 11. But before I could get to them, Trevor appeared in front of me again. I called my parents and told them that I was going back to school to pack some things and would be recuperating at home for the time being. Who knew that Trevor was next to them at the time and heard the conversation? He took the initiative to help me pack my things in the dormitory. Then he found my diary. It records every detail of my love for Trevor since I was 17 years old. Trevor stumbled into my house. The man who was usually very polite ignored the nanny's call this time. He pushed open the door of my room and looked at me with red eyes, holding the notebook in his hand. All my embarrassment was immediately exposed. But it was only for a moment and I quickly calmed down. Trevor's hand was throbbing with veins as he held the notebook. "You've liked me since you were 17? He stared at me with burning and complicated eyes. I met his gaze and simply said, "But I didn't like it the first time you left me at the aquarium. And when you left me in the fire for the last time, I was completely consumed." I blinked my sore eyes. "I'm just sad about the girlhood that has quietly passed away. I don't know." His voice was hoarse. Trevor walked over step by step, knelt beside my bed, frowned in thought, and muttered to himself, "I never found out. Even if you try hard to hide your passionate love, it will still show through your eyes. But you didn't notice my eyes. All you can see is Hannah. I've grown tired of complaining to him. Don't be like that, Trevor. You and Hannah are great together. They are a perfect match." Trevor suddenly looked up, shook his head and smiled bitterly. "I guess I don't like her that much. After she was beaten that time, I started to have some doubts. I felt that she seemed different from when I knew her. In Trevor's eyes, Hannah is pure, gentle, and innocent. But the slap Hannah gave me revealed her true vengeful nature. Trevor's filter for her began to crack. If the girl you like does something you don't like, you will immediately get angry. See, he's not a good guy either. The reason why he is still willing to be with Hannah is simply because he still has expectations for this little white flower of his. The filter is not broken at all. That day Trevor looked at me for a long time with extremely complicated eyes. No matter how harshly I scolded him, he accepted it all. Finally, he just left a vague remark. Trevor leaned against the door and smiled bitterly. Zoe, what should I do? I seem to have made so many mistakes. I had no obligation to answer his questions and was only interested in getting him to leave. Trevor asked in a low voice, shaking my diary. I haven't finished reading it yet. Can you lend it to me for 2 more days? I don't care. It's just a piece of trash. I'll throw it away even if you give it back to me. Something that records your love for a piece of trash is also trash. He looked down at his notebook and retorted quietly. No. 12. After my scar was almost healed, I went back to school. I have to give an explanation for everything that happened to me without any reason. Hannah told Trevor that I hit her, and I didn't care whether Trevor believed it or not. There is no need for me to prove my innocence to him. But I got slapped in the face for no reason. I can't just let it go. I found the girl who beat Hannah that day. The enemy of my enemy may not necessarily be my friend, but they can be temporary allies. She provided me with the information I wanted. At the same time, she told me without hesitation that it was she who spread the rumors about Hannah. This girl's words are awful to hear. She used words like bus. According to her, Hannah was indeed popular with many boys, but it has all gone bad recently. Probably because I'm seriously with Trevor. Trevor disappeared for several days. It wasn't until a week later that I saw him and Hannah in the same frame. I don't know if it was an illusion, but Trevor looked distraught. Moreover, my eyes were fixed on the scarlet area at his fingertips. This is the first time I saw him smoking. Hannah pretended to hug him, but he dodged her. So she had to settle for the next best thing and hold his hand. I stood in the shadow not far away, took a picture of this scene and sent it to several unfamiliar numbers. One of the other parties was the boyfriend of the girl who beat Hannah. Hannah herself admitted at the time that she was beaten because she had an affair with this boy. He is from the school next door. The rest were all boys who had had ambiguous relationships with Hannah. In about half an hour, 3 people arrived. From the initial verbal confrontation to the increasingly emotional pushing by some people behind the scenes. Even slapped Hannah. The 1.80-meter-tall sturdy boy slapped Hannah to the ground. Even had a nosebleed. Trevor just watched coldly from beginning to end, and only frowned slightly when Hannah was beaten. More and more people gathered around, and some of them secretly recorded videos and posted them on super chats and campus walls. Hannah's reputation was ruined. At the same time, it was revealed that the camera outside the laboratory clearly recorded everything, but there was no archived video. One of the boys she was dating was studying computer science. He had been pursuing Hannah for half a year but had made no progress until this happened. Hannah used her willingness to be with him as a bargaining chip in exchange for him taking the risk of breaking the law, secretly hacking into the school's surveillance and transferring the video at that time. Yes, it is a transfer, not a deletion. The boy was cautious and worried that Hannah would betray him, so he kept some evidence. Unexpectedly, before she could turn against him, the house collapsed. The boy completely recognized who she was, took the initiative to explain what happened, and handed over the video intact. After considering the issue of his voluntary surrender, we simply detained him for a few days for criticism and education. But Hannah wasn't so lucky. Someone compiled all her bad deeds and exposed them on Weibo. As the matter continued to ferment, it also attracted a certain amount of social attention. She deliberately interfered in other people's relationships and was involved with multiple boys at the same time, and most importantly, it was illegal. Calls for Hannah to drop out of school are growing louder. In the end, the school could not bear the pressure anymore and tactfully persuaded Hannah to withdraw before she was taken away by the police. She was once proud of herself for being able to attract so many boys, but in the end she suffered the consequences. Before leaving, Hannah went to look for Trevor again and I happened to run into her. She grabbed Trevor's sleeve and sobbed quietly. "Please don't break up. I have never liked those people, and nothing has ever happened between us. I only like you, I'm only attracted to you." But Trevor just pulled back his sleeve indifferently. "Hannah, but I don't think I like you." His words made Hannah freeze. Trevor lowered his eyes, his voice cold. "Honestly, I didn't feel any emotion after learning about all this. I always thought my ideal partner was a pure and gentle girl. Yes, you fit the bill perfectly and I thought I liked you. But recently I realized that I was wrong about many things. Regardless of whether these things happened to you or not, I am planning to break up with you. I'm sorry for making you misunderstand for so long. Hannah's face turned paler with every word Trevor said. She remained standing there until Trevor left. Her crying became louder and louder, and her expression of pain did not seem fake. Hannah eventually suffered the consequences. She played with the feelings of so many boys, but in the end she fell for someone who didn't like her. Trevor later accidentally learned the truth about Hannah being beaten. Without my taking the initiative, he appeared in front of me. He blocked me downstairs of the dormitory. I misunderstood you, Zoe. I was wrong. Then he suddenly grabbed my hand and slapped him in the face. I frowned and pulled my hand back. Are you sick? He still stared at me with paranoia. You can hit me as many times as you want. She pursed her lips and added in a low voice. As long as you can forgive me. Impossible. I refused completely. Trevor, the damage you have done to me is irreversible. Although the scar on my back has nothing to do with you directly, every time the weather changes and it itches, I will think of the day you left me behind. I laughed at myself. I really can't let it go. I pushed Trevor away and left. His voice behind him sounded again. Zoe, I know saying this now will only make you hate me more, but I'm going to say it anyway. During this time I have been reading your notebook over and over again, recalling everything between us based on what you wrote. Those times when you were moved by me, I was also moved by you, but I didn't understand it before, and thought it was just special care for my sister. What he said was not very confident but too clear. I've actually been in love with you for a long time, but I didn't realize it. No, you are not. No one likes someone else like this. You just feel guilty and regretful towards me. But I'm touched after knowing that I have liked you for many years. The mixed emotions make you mistakenly think that it is love. But I don't want to get entangled with him anymore. I pretended not to hear him, and walked away without stopping or looking back. But Trevor is particularly difficult to deal with. The former favorite child of heaven seems to have reached his rebellious stage late. I dropped my studies, started hanging out in bars, and always had a pack of cigarettes in my bag. 14. That day my roommate dragged me to the playground. It was only after I saw the grand confession scene and most people's eyes were fixed on me that I realized what was going on. I was the one being confessed to. As for the junior who confessed to me, I didn't even have a very deep impression of him. He held a large bouquet of Bulgarian roses in his hand, seemed a little blushing, and stammered as he confessed to me. The noises around were getting louder and louder. My words of refusal were choked for a moment. If I refuse now, it will be embarrassing for him. I looked at the flowers in front of me in embarrassment. When I raised my hand hesitantly, someone suddenly grabbed my wrist. He forcefully pulled me to a deserted corner. Trevor reeked of alcohol, but his eyes were exceptionally clear and cold. He held my wrist so tightly that it hurt, and he didn't give me a chance to struggle. His eyes were fixed on me, and his words were particularly harsh. Zoe, don't tell me you're going to say yes to him. You changed your mind so quickly? You can just let go of your so-called love for me, right? The moment he uttered the last word, I slapped him without hesitation. Asshole! Trevor tilted his head and sneered. He moved his hands and pulled me in front of him. The tips of their noses almost touch. Zoe, what do you want from me in order for you to forgive me? Tell me, I can do anything for you. The corners of his eyes were red and slightly tearful. He said the most humble words, but his actions were still arrogant and paranoid. Please, Zoe, don't do this to me. Looking at the boy in front of me who was completely different from before, I calmed down again. Trevor, you left me for Hannah 3 times. If you can make sure these 3 times never happened, I'll forgive you. There was a huge chasm between Trevor and me, and his constant attempts to build bridges here were completely in vain. He looked at me dejectedly, leaving no room for rebuttal. I finally broke free and got my hand back. Without waiting for his response, she turned and left. After walking a distance, I suddenly remembered something and looked back. Trevor was still standing there, looking in the direction I left. It seemed that everything turned upside down after he found the notebook. The person left behind became him, but I was not happy about it. Instead, I felt tired and annoyed because of his entanglement. 15. This winter seems especially long. Around the time of the holiday, my parents' acquisition was almost completed. We are moving out of our original villa. I can finally get away from Trevor and find something to be happy about. I was so happy that I didn't even notice when he suddenly stopped being around me. Until I got a call from Trevor's mom. She burst into tears. "Zoe, can you come and see Trevor? I really don't know what to do. Trevor is injured. Burn." Trevor's mother told me that half a month ago, Trevor went out and passed by a residential building. A fire broke out in one of the units on the 3rd floor. A girl was trapped inside and couldn't get out, and the fire department didn't arrive yet. He rushed in like a madman and rescued the person, but his entire arm was severely burned. "Zoe, Trevor still remembers not being able to get you out of the fire. He must have been thinking about you, so he risked his life to save a stranger." Trevor's mother begged. "Please help Auntie and come see Trevor. I hate Trevor, but I can't ignore Trevor's mother who has always been so nice to me." Seeing Trevor again gave me mixed feelings. He was half leaning against the head of the bed, looking weak and depressed. "Zoe, now that I finally understand, it's really hard." The scars ran from his arms to his neck. Trevor smiled faintly. "For the first few days I couldn't sleep at night because of the pain. Then after it finally healed, the itching started again like countless worms crawling on my arms. Yes, I was like that too. Sometimes I think I should just chop it off." He looked at his arm, his tone calm as if he really intended to do so. I rubbed my brows tiredly and sighed. "Trevor, stop doing these self-indulgent things. Even if you save thousands of people trapped in the fire, it has nothing to do with me. Can you make my scar never exist?" "Then what should I do, Zoe?" He stared at me blankly. "Tell me, what should I do?" I looked at the sunshine outside the window and seemed to feel a hint of warmth. He thought for a few seconds before speaking slowly. "Trevor, if you like someone, you should make her happy, right?" Their gazes moved back and their eyes met. "But what you did doesn't make me happy at all. On the contrary, it's very troublesome. This kind of love is too abnormal. If you continue like this, I might have to consider dropping out of school to avoid you. I shouldn't pay for your regret." When he heard that I was dropping out of school, his body stiffened slightly. My hands unconsciously grabbed the quilt. Trevor lowered his eyes and nodded. "I won't bother you anymore, and I'll try not to appear in front of you. Zoe, can you not take a leave of absence from school?" He seemed to be humbled to the dust and asked cautiously. "I don't like seeing him like this. It makes me feel like he is the victim." I looked away and didn't answer. Just emphasized it one last time before leaving. "Please don't bother me anymore." "Trevor." "I see." I breathed a sigh of relief only after I walked out of the Fisher family's villa. The inexplicable feeling of depression in my heart also dissipated. The warm midday sun shines on me, melting away some of the coldness. I held out my hand to feel the temperature. The last glimmer of chill is about to disappear. This winter seems like it's finally over.